Zhou Yuan was a normal, ordinary employee when he was offered an internship at another company. He was enthusiastic. Unfortunately, everyone got what they wanted. Some wanted a cup of coffee, others made him type a document all day. The boy carried large piles of office documents back and forth, but no one had the idea of teaching him the wisdom of the job. One day, Yuan was in the kitchen near the coffee machine. The kitchen was empty. Everyone in the company was busy doing other things. The young man thought sadly that he would spend the whole day serving the staff. Just then, Su Ruoqing, a senior in the company, entered the kitchen. The green-eyed girl took his coffee and told him that sometimes he should learn to say no to employees. They had known each other since university. Ever since, Zhou Yuan had looked at her with such affectionate eyes. While staring at Ruoqing, the young man didn't notice the cup and the coffee spilled over his hand. So Yen let go of the cup and all the coffee fell down his pants. The girl offered to clean up the stain. The young man sat down and turned even redder. Ruoqing said there was no need to be shy, after all, they weren't strangers. The girl had to kneel down to wipe the stain just above her knee and was embarrassed by her own shyness. Meanwhile, the chef entered the kitchen. He didn't like to see Zhou Yuan anxious. He had to hand out presents to the staff. The young man tried to object that it wasn't his responsibility. The man got angry and shouted that the boy should know all the departments. Ruoqing asked if they could go together, but the director said she needed to prepare material for a meeting. The girl said goodbye to Zhou Yuan with a wink and whispered that next time they would go together. The man saw that Ruoqing was being very kind to the apprentice and struck him furiously in the face with a gift bag. The paper bag fell to the ground and spilled out a flawless silver paper. It was wrapped in golden ribbons. Zhou Yuan was angry, but the director wouldn't let him say a word. He demanded that he collect all the gifts and distribute them among the departments. The man smiled with satisfaction as he watched the boy obediently pick up the bags. He knew that the young man had nothing more to look forward to in life. Zhou Yuan was even angrier. If he didn't need this job, he would show them all that he shouldn't be intimidated. Suddenly, the young man's phone vibrated in his trouser pocket, distracting him from his negative thoughts. At first glance, the message looked like ordinary spam, offering more money and a secure life. Zhou Yuan stared in disbelief at the image of the medieval warrior on the screen and decided he would look at it later. Suddenly, the warrior's avatar became three-dimensional. The young man was horrified to feel that he was being sucked into the phone. At the same time, a golden portal appeared out of nowhere in a city alley. Yuan fell, hitting the ground painfully. Then one of those present was standing nearby. The boy couldn't understand where he was. Suddenly, he heard a strange, bizarre howl behind him. He turned around startled, hoping he had heard something. Behind the iron grating, dozens of hands reached out towards him. These creatures looked more like zombies than human beings. It was then that Zhou Yuan realized what he was dealing with and fell to his knees. He couldn't understand how he had gotten to this place. A system menu appeared in front of him. Thanks to the information, he discovered that he could travel between worlds. The boy's eyes shone with greed and he quickly accessed the information panel. The world glowed with new colors. Suddenly, a section of the grid collapsed. Several zombies managed to destroy part of it. Zhou Yuan almost fainted with fear and ran for the first time in his life. The young man realized that his life depended directly on his speed. Feeling free, the crowd of zombies began to chase him. The roar of their voices made him panic even more. He had the advantage. The zombies were moving much more slowly and couldn't catch up with him. After a few minutes, the young man was already tired and began to breathe hard, but he kept running, slowing down slightly. The boy shouted for help to the whole neighborhood in the hope that they would hear him. Suddenly, a fragmentation grenade with the pin removed flew from the roof of a nearby house towards the crowd of zombies. Throwing another grenade, a blonde girl with a military appearance jumped down from the roof, shouting at the young man to hide. Her name is Lin Soon, who landed deftly and kept running. I was used to doing this kind of thing. The zombies were torn apart by the huge explosion. The girl took out a lollipop and didn't even look back. Zhou Yuan thanked the girl, who had already put the candy in her mouth. Turned out that she was hunting zombies. The young man admitted that he couldn't thank her enough, so he just handed her a light box. The girl didn't know what it was, so she sniffed it carefully. It didn't look dangerous and she risked taking a bite. As soon as she had taken a bite, the girl screamed with excitement. Zhou Yuan smiled, realizing that she hadn't yet reached the filling. The stranger closed her eyes in delight and exclaimed, embarrassed, that the food was delicious. Surprised by the girl's skill and the way she dealt with the zombies, Zhou Yuan felt impressed. He watched as she calmly chewed lightly, clearly enjoying the taste. It was clear that, despite the chaos around her, she found small moments of pleasure. Determined to find out more about this strange huntress, he began to ask her about her experiences and how she had become so proficient in dealing with the undead. The conversation revealed that Lin Sun was an experienced survivor, someone who had lost a lot in this life but refused to give up. Her determination inspired Zhou Yuan, who promised himself that he would do everything in his power to survive and protect those around him. Together, they formed an unlikely alliance, joining forces against the zombie apocalypse threatening humanity. The young man thought she was pretending, but to his surprise, the girl handed him a small gold ingot and said it was payment, that she couldn't give it away for free. After licking the lollipop, the warrior woman smiled and said she should raise the price. Zhou Yuan asked the beautiful girl her name. She turned quickly and stared at him with her blue eyes, which the young man immediately fell in love with. He discovered that her name was Lin Sun. The young man quickly adapted and arrived at a market where vendors offered various weapons to recover. So Yuan placed 6 types of cakes nearby and began calling out to passersby. One of them recalled that his grandfather used to talk about this food. Another asked how much the candy cost. The young man smiled and immediately replied that 1 gram of the ancient and healing product was equivalent to 1 gram of gold. The shoppers complained, disgruntled. One of them shouted that no one would buy a piece of this at such an absurd price. Then Zhou Yuan stood his ground, explaining that life is only given once, and that the next day, everyone would regret not having tasted the cake. A bearded man approached, handed over 50 G of gold, and asked for half of the ancient delicacy. The other buyers envied the man. He felt like a mercenary for being so rich and being able to afford to play with money. Unlike the others, the man knew perfectly well the value of what he had bought. Zhou Yuan watched intently as the bearded man shared among the curious people around him. The sweet, familiar smell of the cake attracted even more people, awakening memories of calmer, happier times. The young salesman realized that nostalgia was his greatest ally. Seeing the growing interest, he decided to tell stories about how the sweet was enjoyed at parties and celebrations, bringing a sense of normality amidst the chaos. He described the smooth texture and unparalleled flavor, as if each bite was a piece of history, a link to the past that everyone longed to recover. With his communication skills, Zhou Yuan managed to convince other buyers to offer their own prices for the cake, starting a kind of auction. The price of the cake rose rapidly, surprising even the most skeptical. Lin Sun watched from afar, impressed by the young man's cunning. She knew he had a special talent for turning something simple into a real treasure. The mutual admiration between the two began to grow, and the partnership that was formed was not only based on survival, but also on respect and understanding. By the end of the day, Zhou Yuan had exchanged almost all of his stock for a considerable amount of gold and other valuable items. He thanked everyone, promising to bring back more of that candy in the future. Turning to Lin Sun, he realized that together they could achieve great things. She smiled, confirming that he had the potential to become a powerful leader in the new world they lived in. With this new perspective, Zhou Yuan began to plan his next steps, knowing that, with allies like Lin Sun, his chances of success were greater than he had ever imagined. The guy felt like he was in heaven. The gold he had spent was worth it. The mercenary soon appreciated the splendor of the cake, a real treat for the eyes and the palate, and extended another 100 G gold ingot to the vendor, asking for 2 halves of different flavors. The excellence of the product quickly attracted other customers, who came running, eager to try a piece of the wonderful cake. After shelling out a good amount of gold, the 3 customers enjoyed the delicacies, impressed by the superior quality of the cakes. They had tried many cakes before, but nothing that compared to this. As the evening progressed, the ranks of the merchants gradually thinned. At this point, Zhou Yuan had managed to sell a significant amount of cakes and was satisfied with the result. Within a few hours, his purse was filled with almost 600 G of gold. The metallic sound of the coins was music to the young man's ears. He quickly calculated that, if he continued at this rate, in a few months he would earn an amount that would take him years to accumulate by working elsewhere. Suddenly, a sharp knife dug into the boy's ribs. The smile disappeared from his face immediately. A hoarse voice whispered to him not to move. The hooded stranger, with a malicious smile, informed the terrified young man that Lao was interested in him. Zhou Yuan was paralyzed with fear. The bandit seemed unwilling to let him go so easily and demanded that he hand over the gold he had won with so much effort. The man seemed to read Zhou Yuan's thoughts and declared that nothing could save the young man except handing over the gold himself. The boy cried out in desperation, begging to go back. In the next instant, a sheet of gold almost touched his face and a golden portal appeared in front of him. Without thinking twice, Zhou Yuan jumped into the portal. The annoyed mercenary tried to hold him back, but to his surprise, the golden circle disappeared with its victim. The man looked around in frustration, but the young man was no longer there. Meanwhile, Zhou Yuan found himself back on his own floor. The portal had thrown him in front of a large TV. The young man fell to his knees, exhausted, resting his head on the sofa. He had narrowly escaped death. Everything was going according to plan, but he knew that he still had a limited time before entering the world of the apocalypse, which would be in 12 hours. During that time, he would prepare a motto for a crucial webinar. The next morning, Zhou Yuan started his day at the office as usual. An irritated colleague reminded him that he had asked to distribute gifts the day before. Zhou Yuan, with a closed face, replied that he had joined the company to improve his skills and not to perform messenger duties. The tension between the two was palpable, reflecting the young man's frustration with his job and the constant pressure to deal with tasks beyond his scope. If you've made it this far in the video, don't forget to leave a like to strengthen our work. I'm counting on you. Moving on. Hearing a familiar voice, the director approached the young man and demanded that he make coffee. Zhou Yuan, with a determined look and a firm tone, refused to comply with the order, claiming that he had important personal matters to attend to at the moment. The principal, visibly surprised and a little irritated, questioned Lin Shan about how he still held his position if not even the apprentices were willing to obey him. Lin Shan, maintaining a calm and serene expression, offered the young man more time and assured the director that the situation would change soon. She explained that she was working to help Zhou Yuan become more autonomous and efficient, and that these challenges were part of the growth process. Zhou Qin, who was watching the scene from afar, was pleased with Zhou Yuan's change of attitude and wondered, since when he had become so assertive and defiant. Zhou Yuan, smiling shyly, attributed this transformation to Lin Shan's constant support and example, recognizing that she was largely to blame. He explained that he had learned the importance of independence and assertiveness, valuable lessons that he was beginning to apply in his life. Zhou Yuan glanced furtively at his watch, noticing that almost 12 hours of recharging had passed. It was time to start his journey to the world of the apocalypse. As he hadn't set any specific coordinates, the system decided for him and transported him to a random location, leaving him in a flat area with a breathtaking view of the mountains in the background. This time, Zhou Yuan was better prepared. He had cooked a bag full of meat in the hope of making a substantial profit from selling it. However, his plans were abruptly interrupted when a stranger slapped him on the back. He quickly turned around, only to find that he was in the same apocalypse scenario he had faced before. In the middle of the mountains, a zombie had suddenly appeared, forcing him to flee in order not to be captured. What's more, he was carrying a heavy backpack as he tried to escape. Zhou Yuan quickly realized that the backpack was hindering his progress and that he needed to abandon food to have a chance of surviving. With difficulty breathing and a growing sense of panic, he opened one of the cans of meat and threw out the contents to create a distraction. The strategy worked. The zombies drifted towards the canned meat, fighting each other for the juicy morsel. Zhou Yuan took advantage of the gap created to get away, even though he had lost half his provisions, a significant loss that weighed heavily on his mind. Exhausted, he found a spot at the foot of a cliff and settled down to rest for a while, trying to catch his breath and gather his strength. However, his relief was short-lived, as he soon heard the irregular sound of zombie voices approaching again. The young man felt a wave of frustration and despair, but also renewed focus. He needed to use all his skills and strategies to survive and, at the same time, look for ways to better prepare himself for the challenges ahead. The journey had only just begun, and Zhou Yuan was determined to overcome every obstacle he encountered, constantly learning and adapting to the unforgiving new world he found himself in. With tired fingers and an expression of determination, Zhou Yuan smiled with satisfaction when he realized that the zombies were more interested in the canned meat than in him. The effort of using the system's menu to exchange the gold he had accumulated for basic combat skills seemed worthwhile. He didn't hesitate to invest his resources in this way, understanding the urgency of acquiring these skills and knowing that he could earn more gold soon. With the monsters approaching, Zhou Yuan was more prepared than before to face the dangers of the apocalypse. The advantage was clearly on his side, and the zombies seemed to realize it. One of them roared and advanced, but its attempt to grab Zhou Yuan failed. Without hesitating, Zhou Yuan turned around and kicked his opponent in the stomach, causing him to fall to the ground. The young man felt a wave of satisfaction at his first victory. Adopting a combat stance, He shouted that he would avenge everyone for the money he had lost, a cry of defiance that echoed across the devastated landscape. To ensure that the zombie was neutralized, Zhou Yuan landed a punch between the monster's eyes. The blow was so powerful and precise that the zombie fell unconscious, unable to continue the threat. Without slowing down, Zhou Yuan continued his fight, eliminating 2 more zombies that were nearby. Despite his fatigue, he was determined. With the help of the system, Zhou Yuan managed to kill 3 zombies single-handedly, a remarkable feat that required all his strength and courage. Suddenly, a large snow-white truck pulled up to the scene of the fight. The driver got out of the vehicle and, with a look of admiration, sincerely praised the young man for his bravery and skill. He and his companion had been watching the battle and, although they wanted to intervene, they realized that Zhou Yuan was handling the situation effectively. The man, wearing overalls, proudly explained that they were hunters specialized in eliminating monsters. However, a growing sound of grunting and heavy footsteps began to approach, and the man shouted that another group of monsters was coming towards them. Starting the truck's engine, he asked Zhou Yuan to hurry, claiming that there was no time for long conversations. Zhou Yuan, already familiar with the urgency of dealing with zombies, needed no further encouragement. He made great leaps to reach the truck and the vehicle moved in time, escaping the zombies that were already a few meters from the rear bump. The man in the back of the truck handed Zhou Yuan an assault rifle, expressing his hope that the young man would know how to use the weapon. The hunter warned that bullets were expensive and each shot had to be precise. As Zhou Yuan mumbled a nervous reply, the hunter shot the 3 fastest enemies in the forehead. Zhou Yuan quickly realized that, in this world, precision shooting was crucial to survival. Unfortunately, his lack of experience with guns was a significant obstacle. The driver encouraged him through the rear window, shouting that the zombies wouldn't disappear on their own, and that it was necessary to shoot them to ensure safety. Zhou Yuan's dilemma was evident. In his world, the unauthorized use of weapons could land him in prison, a disturbing thought in the midst of chaos. However, the situation demanded immediate action. With 100 points accumulated in the system, he decided to invest in a basic mastery of weapons. Zhou Yuan picked up the assault rifle with a mixture of anxiety and determination and took aim at the nearest enemy. The skills he had acquired made his actions more automatic and efficient. He fired with precision, shooting down the zombies running behind the truck with the same dexterity as the hunter next to him. However, a peculiar monster caught his eye. It was a different zombie, with a black appearance and unusual agility. The bullets ricocheted without causing significant damage to the monster, which moved with impressive speed. Zhou Yuan, alarmed, asked the hunter about the type of creature he was facing. The man explained that it was a level 2 zombie, tougher and more dangerous than ordinary one. The reality of facing a level 2 zombie made the situation even more desperate. The black monster managed to reach the truck and grabbed the hunter by the neck, pulling him out of the vehicle. The hunter struggled to breathe, almost asphyxiated by the zombie's relentless grip. The monster, showing brutal strength, threw the hunter to the ground, raising great clouds of dust that obscured his vision. The scene was terrifying. The hunter seemed to be on the verge of death, with the zombie showing no signs of giving up. Zhou Yuan knew that if he didn't act quickly, the situation could become even more critical. With his heart beating fast, Zhou Yuan watched the black monster continue its relentless onslaught. The hunter, now on the ground, was clearly in trouble, and the zombie seemed determined to finish what it had started. Zhou Yuan, gripping his assault rifle tightly, knew he had to do something to change the course of the battle. He positioned himself at the back of the truck, trying to find an opportunity to fire. With each movement of the level 2 zombie, Zhou Yuan adjusted his aim, fighting against the pressure of the moment and the fatigue that weighed on him. The hunter was struggling to get up, his panting showing how close he was to collapse. Zhou Yuan took a deep breath, concentrating on staying calm and using the skills he had acquired. Every shot had to be perfect. There was no room for error. Finally, with controlled breathing and a focused aim, Zhou Yuan fired. The bullets hit the zombie with more precision than before, causing the black monster to recoil momentarily. The zombie seemed agitated, but it wasn't enough to bring it down. Zhou Yuan knew he had to keep up the constant attack. He kept firing, each bullet counting to ensure the hunter's survival and his own. The level 2 zombie, despite its wounds, still moved with terrifying strength. Zhou Yuan struggled to keep control of the rifle while trying to find a way to defeat the monster. Finally, with one clear shot, he managed to hit a vulnerable spot on the zombie, causing the creature to fall backwards, finally defeated. The hunter, panting and covered in dust, managed to get up with difficulty. Zhou Yuan, still holding the rifle, looked at the man with a mixture of relief and concern. The hunter thanked him with a look of gratitude, recognizing Zhou Yuan's courage and skill at such a critical moment. Although the immediate danger had passed, Zhou Yuan knew that there was still much to face and that the apocalypse was far from over. With the hunter recovering by his side, Zhou Yuan prepared for the next challenge, aware that the fight for survival was far from over. Zhou Yuan felt a surge of strength. He was now ready to fight and ran towards the big zombie with his gun in hand. The monster clearly hadn't expected such resistance and fell to the ground, receiving a knee to the head. His eyes lit up with hatred, but the advantage was lost. The tip of the rifle appeared in its mouth. The young man sarcastically asked if the zombie was hungry and offered it some lead. A shot rang out and the monster was dead. The driver approached the guy, dragging his wounded companion. He said with admiration that he had underestimated him a little. Zhou Yuan exclaimed that, after all, the boys had also saved his life, so he couldn't abandon them to their fate. The rescued young man knelt down beside the dead monster and rummaged around in its entrail. He took out a blue crystal and explained that zombies have crystals of different colors. Such a crystal is very expensive. Without hesitation, the hunter handed over the crystal and declared that he had earned the right to possess it. Zhou Yuan asked incredulously if he could really do that, if he could take this expensive item for himself. The young man replied that he had killed the monster himself, so the crystal was rightfully his. The driver patted his companion on the shoulder and added that no crystal was worth his brother's life. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of white crystals. They were cheaper, but even these were enough for ammunition. Zhou Yuan thought about the crystal mining system and the different price of the stone. He realized, telling him that it was much more profitable to be a hunter in this world. The driver gave the young man a friendly pat on the shoulder, snapping him out of his thoughts. The boy jumped in surprise. The man invited the frightened Zhou Yuan to join them. He's a good hunter, he said. As the boy still didn't know what he wanted, his new friends offered to take him to the nearest village. The truck drove away slowly, leaving deep footprints in the loose soil of the mountain valley. The young man looked at the blue crystal, suspecting that there was some kind of energy inside it. Meanwhile, the system activated. The crystals that fell from the monsters' bodies could also be exchanged for experience points. Zhou Yuan confirmed the exchange. The blue crystal began to melt in the air and moved piece by piece towards the transparent screen. The system awarded 100 points. The young man couldn't believe that such a small crystal contained 100 grams of gold. In addition, the software detected that the user had many objects and offered to exchange 100 points for 1 square meter of space. It was an eternal discovery. The space backpack would really come in handy now. The gold was already weighing down his pocket. The driver stopped the truck and explained the route to the newcomer. The road to the village passed through a refugee camp. The place looked bleak. Most people lived in tents. Some had turned trailers into dwelling. Everywhere, by the side of the road, there were shabby people starving to death, even willing to trade their bodies for food. Suddenly, Zhou Yuan heard the cries of a girl and turned around with interest. He felt sorry for all those people. A little further on, a girl dressed in blue ran towards a red car that was passing in front of them, with tears in her eyes. She begged them to share some food, as she was starving. A point-blank shot interrupted the girl's suffering. Her anguished eyes easily reflected her incomprehension at such cruelty. The gun was still smoking in the hands of the passenger in the red car. He shouted for no one to dirty his car. Zhou Yuan was furious and almost jumped out of the car to teach those evildoers a lesson for killing the girl. The hunter authoritatively put his hand on his shoulder and urged him to calm down and only attack if he felt strong. The young man looked at the body of the innocent girl lying in a pool of blood and agreed that he needed to get stronger. There were guards at the entrance to the settlement. The hunter explained that everyone had to have a pass. Captain Ozen got out of the vehicle and showed his paper. The guard asked him if he had shot a lot today. The man turned and pointed at Zhou Yuan, asking the boy for a pass. The young man went along with them. The settlement was quite large and was protected by a double defensive perimeter with watchtower. The young man thanked the captain for the pass. The man smiled and wished him luck. His base was elsewhere. Zhou Yuan waved cheerfully to the truck. The hunter stood up and returned the young man's wave in a friendly manner as the car disappeared into thin air. The boy took a can of meat out of his backpack. It was time to earn money. He hoped that the tinned meat would at least turn into a pot of gold. There was a frenzy at the market today. People were selling absolutely everything. One young man was offering a large Jeep for 70% off. The young man in the white shirt refused to sell the rarest alcohol of the age for 3 blue crystals. Zhou Yuan watched the auction with interest. He realized that absolutely any kind of merchandise could be bought and sold here. Suddenly, a large man appeared in front of the boy and asked him to wait a moment. The boy didn't like the situation. The man quickly pulled out an assault rifle and smiled with satisfaction. He said that his interlocutor looked quite rich. Zhou Yuan asked in surprise how he could steal in broad daylight with a gun. Turned out that he was an arms dealer. The young man trembled with fear and asked what this could have to do with him. Armed with his humble persona, the boy wanted to leave quickly. The seller said he had seen him in town with hunters and pointed eloquently at the weapons counter, offering something. Zhou Yuan looked surprised at the machine gun and asked if the man was afraid of selling weapons. The shopkeeper laughed. Everyone should have a gun. He offered to give the assault rifle for just 5 blue crystals. For familiarity, the young man would get a 20% discount. To the seller's misfortune, the guy had neither blue crystals nor gold. The negotiation was pointless. The man angrily asked him to give him at least 200 potatoes for the riffle. Yuan said, feeling guilty, that he didn't have any potatoes. The merchant made a dismissive gesture with his hand, asking him not to interfere in Ozi's business. The young man took out a tin of meat and declared that you shouldn't judge people by appearances. He had more valuable things than crystal. The man exclaimed that this was where the conversation should have started. The man smiled and moved the can closer, inserting his finger into the opener. Yuan opened the lid with a quick movement and showed the merchant the contents. The man couldn't resist the strong smell and offered any weapon for 5 packets. The young man was pleased with the deal. They shook hands firmly. The salesman was also very happy to have obtained a valuable product. The guy asked where he could buy ammunition for his gun. It turned out that the ammunition could only be sold in an official warehouse. Yuan wasn't the only one there. There was a long queue for the girl at the counter to restock. He showed his gun to the pretty saleswoman and asked if she had any ammunition. Turned out that for 1 gram of gold, he could get 10 bullets. The boy was surprised. He hadn't realized that ammunition for firearms was so expensive. The blue-eyed beauty replied boredly that 1 bullet could save his life. Of course, he could choose not to buy them. Zhou Yuan took out a huge gold ingot and arrogantly asked how many bullets he could get in exchange. The saleswoman smiled immediately and brought out 3 small cards. The girl, embarrassed, took a business card out of her cleavage and offered to get in touch. She would sell any amount of ammunition. The young man looked confusedly at the business card and realized that in this world money could buy absolutely everything. Zhou Yuan arrived home and put all the things on the table, the subfuses and automatic rifles barely fitting. The young man looked critically at his rudimentary arsenal. It was enough for the first time, but they would have to expand the business a little. Suddenly, the boy heard urgent knocks on the door. He didn't know who it could be. His eyebrows rose in surprise. Zhou Yuan rushed to the table, not knowing where to hide so many weapons at once. He looked around frantically. A very familiar female voice sounded from the other side of the door. It was then that the young and beautiful Roaching shouted out that it was she who had come to visit him. Zhou Yuan began frantically hiding his weapons and ammunition and asked the girl to wait for a while by the door. No matter how hard he tried, the guns kept appearing behind his nostrils. There was absolutely nowhere to hide them. The only place to put the gun was the small space under the bed. Taking out the gun and the ammunition, the boy ran to the door and let his acquaintance in. The girl waited patiently. Zhou Yuan asked why she had come to his house. Roaching replied that she had cooked more food than she needed and brought it for him. She smiled and asked why the boy had taken so long to open the door. Taking the food from the girl, Zhou Yuan went to the fridge. The space was too narrow for 2 people. He put the groceries in the fridge and looked around with interest. Turned out that the girl was a good cook. The young man glanced furtively at her, who was standing next to the kitchen sink, and thought it would be nice to live with her. That way he could come home from work every day in a solid dark suit. And his dear wife asked him what he wanted more, giving him the choice between a hot bath and a cup of coffee. Zhou Yuan imagined Roaching in a short dress that barely concealed her exuberant figure. Instead of food, the embarrassed wife offered herself. Meanwhile, the girl sat on the bed. She asked the master if there were any obscenities in the men's room. Yuan smiled and made it clear that he liked the girl. He said that there was nothing like that in his apartment. The guest pointed to small blue slippers and asked angrily what that could mean. The young man was horrified. The barrel of the automatic rifle appeared under his bed. It was also shining treacherously. There was absolutely no other way out. Zhou Yuan couldn't allow them to discover his arsenal and threw himself at the surprised girl. They had never been so close. The young man made his guest blush. What's more, the young man had pinned her against the bed with his body and, realizing this, she felt even more ashamed. Mastering herself, Roaching pushed the young man away. He apologized and exclaimed that he had lost his mind because of her beauty. Still embarrassed, the girl got out of bed, trying not to look at her master, and said that everything was fine as she walked out of the apartment door. Rooking said that this kind of behavior is common among many young people. The young man was sad. He had saved the gun, but he had lost his reputation. Of course, the guest would probably hate him now. To his surprise, Rooking appeared from behind the door as a farewell and said, embarrassed, that she was very happy to hear such words. The doors closed abruptly and the girl left. For several minutes, Zhou Yuan remained silent. The confused young man couldn't believe that all this had really happened. Turned out that their feelings were mutual. The young man started slapping himself on the cheek to come back to reality. The time was coming for the transition to the next world, and he needed to prepare. He strolled around the city and thought about how he could make money. Buying preserves in large quantities would immediately attract attention. Nearby, a man with a sign stopped next to a truck full of sacks of potatoes and offered to buy the goods. Zhou Yuan thought that this idea wasn't so bad. The profit would be small, but he could buy potatoes in any quantity. What's more, the owner was willing to give a 20% discount because his business wasn't doing well. The young man looked at the quality of the potatoes and exclaimed that he would buy. The man asked how many bags he was willing to buy. The young man smiled and said he would buy the whole crop as long as the seller delivered it to his door. The man noticed that the customer was a little embarrassed by his fragile appearance. Without thinking twice, he tore off his clothes, revealing a muscular and imposing torso. After completing the transaction, Zhou Yuan had a moment of clarity. He should have asked about the quantity of goods beforehand. His room was now crammed with potatoes, stacked to the ceiling. He began to wonder whether he would be able to sell them in time, or whether he would end up with a huge quantity of potatoes with no destination. When the young man arrived at the market, the apocalyptic world was in full swing. Zhou Yuan, with a backpack full of potatoes, wondered what he could get in return. He found a small blacksmith's shop on one of the corners, and what he saw surprised him. He thought that no one would need swords anymore in a world where zombies were a constant threat. A great blacksmith was there, working around the clock, melting glowing metal and shouting that he had the best weapons in town. The young man approached and asked if hunters used to buy their own melee weapon. The blacksmith explained that firearms attract zombies and need constant maintenance. Young Zhou Yuan was surprised by the explanation and realized that, instead of relying solely on firearms, it might be a good idea to acquire a sword or dagger and learn to use them quickly. He was interested in a rather short halberd and asked the price. To his surprise, the blacksmith was more interested in food than money. Without hesitation, Zhou Yuan mentioned the potatoes he had. He doubted the man would pay much attention, but when the vendor showed him the potatoes, the blacksmith's eyes lit up with happiness. The blacksmith was delighted and almost cried with emotion at the sight of those potatoes, which reminded him of ancient times, before the apocalypse. In return, he was more than willing to give the young man the best katana in his store. The young man left the market with a satisfied smile, knowing that even in a devastated world, small exchanges and gestures of kindness could still make a difference. The blacksmith took the sword out of its scabbard and told me that it was his best work, with crystals embedded in the blade to cause more damage. It turns out that the blade has another characteristic. The more zombies it kills, the sharper it becomes. So Yuan was almost dancing with joy. He had managed to negotiate such a powerful weapon for just a sack of potatoes. Without wasting any time, the young man called up the system menu and exchanged 100 experience points for the sword's basic skill. The boy felt considerably safer now. With his sword in hand, he strolled through the dense forest nearby. The zombies quickly smelled his new victim and pounced on him with wild screams. Without hiding his presence, with a slight movement of his fingers, Zhou Yuan opened the scabbard and smiled victoriously. Stupid people, they can't tell the difference between the weak and the strong. Those zombies continued chasing like normal prey, without realizing that they were chasing the hunter. The young man turned and with his first blow easily cut off the head of the first pursuer. And obviously he repeated the feat with the second. And it wasn't long before it was all over. The dangerous monsters were already on the ground, blood still dripping from their blades. Zhou Yuan turned the katana on himself. Its blade shone so brightly that it could be used as a mirror. Following the hunter's advice, the young man approached the decaying creature. His head was captured and he searched it. These zombies weren't very strong, you could only get a white crystal. Suddenly, the sound of a gunshot echoed in the forest. The first shot from the small pistol killed the fleeing monster. The bullet hit her in the head. Then we saw a beautiful huntress, dressed in a black top and shorts, who was lamenting the lack of enough crystals to buy ammunition. Her eyes showed frustration mixed with despair. But suddenly the situation changed dramatically when a larger zombie jumped out from behind a tree. Its teeth were more like those of a wild animal and its long tongue, which looked like a grotesque tie, stretched out in a sinister manner. That warrior, who was initially cornered and discouraged, immediately perked up. She knew that this was the chance she had been waiting for. If she managed to defeat that level 2 zombie, she would get the money she needed for ammunition and food. It was too valuable an opportunity to pass up. With her heart racing and her mind focused, she prepared for the fight. The huge monster came closer and closer, attracted by the smell of fresh meat. The zombie's grotesque tongue stretched down to the huntress' knee, and the tension in the air was palpable. The Amazon, her eyes shining with determination, knew she had to seize this chance. Her hand gripped the weapon, ready for combat. Every move and every strategy counted now, because the confrontation with the zombie would be a crucial battle. She couldn't go wrong. The surrounding forest seemed to have fallen silent, as if awaiting the outcome of this imminent confrontation. And it's with this tremendous hook that we'll end our video here. I've brought you the slightly more detailed summary of this manhwa, and it's important to remember the lessons we learn from this story. What would you do if you suddenly became the richest man in the world? Answer here in the comments, starting with, if I became the richest man in the world, I would. I'm gonna reply to everyone who comments down here just to see if you've watched the video to the end, okay? Well, everyone, if you liked this video, you already know, right? Leave me your like, it helps me a lot, and also comment if you've read Become the Richest Man in Last Days, what you thought of it, and also recommend other manhwas and manga for us to comment on here on the channel. Big hugs to you and see you later.